Welcome back, everybody, to the show. I hope you're doing absolutely wonderful. I hope you had a great weekend. Let's start with the news that broke over the weekend, which was a gunman entering the Mar-A-Lago premises, presumably looking for Trump, but we don't have a ton of information right now on it. We do have some characterizations, both wrong and more credible, about who this individual was. He ended up being shot dead after allegedly pointing his gun at Secret Service and law enforcement personnel. So then they shot him. I want to start with the sheriff laying out what we knew at the point of this press conference. And then, as happens so often with instances like this, a lot of people across the political spectrum, but especially within the MAGA media world, jump immediately to conclusions. And then the conclusions about this event that they jump to inform broader conclusions about how to characterize their opposition. But then as we learn more about this guy, he's not exactly the left-wing archetype that you may have assumed. Now, other than him, it is a tragic situation given what ended up happening, but other than him, no one was hurt. And I'll let you hear from the sheriff here, and then we'll talk about the truth behind who this guy seems to be. And it's not what Scott Bessent was telling us.
All right. My name's Rick Bradshaw. I'm the sheriff of Palm Beach County. I have with me from the FBI, Special Agent in Charge Brett Skiles, Special Agent in Charge Rafael Barrios from the Secret Service. Also, I have Resident Agent in Charge David Clancy. At 1:30 this morning, the security detail detected that
Kash Patel was going to be at this press conference, but they weren't able to find a cool enough jacket for him so that he could look like a special agent. And so then he ended up not being able to be there. Actually, we do know what Kash Patel was doing, which we'll get to later in the show, which was getting hammered while this was going on.
Individual had made his way into the inner perimeter of Mar-A-Lago. A deputy and two Secret Service agents on the detail went to that area to investigate. They confronted a white male that was carrying a gas can and a shotgun. He was ordered to drop those two pieces of equipment that he had with him, at which time he put down the gas can, raised the shotgun.
Just the quickest pause to request that you click the subscribe button, the simplest, easiest, freest way, completely free, to support the work that we do. Right below the video, click that subscribe button. Back to the video.
To a shooting position. At that point in time, the deputy and the two Secret Service agents fired their weapons and neutralized the threat. He is deceased at the scene.
So if you think about this series of events, if it's as the sheriff just laid out there, again, a lot that we don't know, and unlike a lot of people, I don't jump to conclusions before we actually know exactly what happened. But if it is the way that he just outlined, you could expect that if you went on to the residence of the president, aside from the White House, but where the other place is that he lives, which he actually happened not to be there at that point in time, but maybe the shooter thought he would be there, and you point your gun at law enforcement, if that's indeed what happened, then this outcome is what you would expect. But as that news broke, what are you gonna see? Before we know anything, which now, given what we do know, it makes it even more ridiculous what we saw a lot of these MAGA folks coming out and saying. You can just expect that whatever the facts are, people are going to run out and make the political point about how, see, our opponents are just violent, and any political violence we see, it's only because of left-wing rhetoric. There's never any introspection about the broader heightening of tensions. And yes, the way that the MAGA movement in particular uses very escalatory rhetoric. And it's all about, no, there's just a sole problem on the left with violent political rhetoric, even though as we learn more about this guy, it seems like he came from a very pro-Trump family, and maybe even himself was pro-Trump. So then you're thinking, but what about the gun? I'll get to that in a second. It does relate to Epstein.
And, Maria, I just want to say, why do we look back here and think two would-be assassins dead, one in jail for life, and this venom coming from the other side. Look at this terrible, profane Senate commercial in Illinois. I would call for them to take that down. Take that down, because it is that kind of venom that we don't know whether this person was a mastermind, unhinged, or what, but they are normalizing this violence. It's got to stop. I want to congratulate Sean Curran and the Secret Service for protecting the president and his family.
So again, it's like, why don't you ever say that whenever it's political violence against Democrats? Of course, my stance is universally opposed to this and horrified. Why are you assuming this person was motivated by Democratic politics or left-wing ideology when, as we learn more, we actually get headlines like this? Mar-a-Lago gunman was reportedly fixated on Epstein files and believed there was a Trump cover-up, and specifically, he regularly expressed support for President Donald Trump. Obviously, at this point, if he's dead, so we don't exactly know what the plan was here. But if we're assuming because he brought a gun, pointed to law enforcement at Mar-a-Lago, your assumption would be maybe he was looking for Trump or associated people. Obviously, you would go, okay, well, he doesn't support Trump now. But this is someone who came from, as his family said, a very big Trump supporting family. And then his coworker said, as you saw in this reporting, allegedly, that he had expressed support for Trump, but then the Epstein files saga disillusioned him. That is not a left winger. That is someone with a history of actually being a right winger, or according to some of his family members, he wasn't very political or he didn't say much, but coworker said he did regularly express support for President Trump. So why do I bring that up? Does it diminish how frightening it is that someone with a gun went on to Mar-a-Lago, that they ended up being killed? There was a shooting at the secondary residence of the President of the United States. No, it doesn't serve to diminish any of that, but I'm just getting sick and tired of people weaponizing instances like this for actually a goal that will make more instances like this more likely. The more you're unwilling to be truthful about our issue with political violence, about what is radicalizing, especially young men, the more likely we're going to have acts of violence like this. And we've seen it. We've seen it after the assassination attempt of Trump, after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. With this, there is never a thoughtful response, analyzing the facts as they are, not as you want them to be, and then trying to articulate a more thoughtful path forward. It's just, this is all because our opponents suck, even when it doesn't relate to them, from what we can tell here. I can read more of this if you'd like. TMZ reported on Sunday that the man who was shot and killed by Secret Service agents after he breached the secure perimeter at Mar-a-Lago with a shotgun was fixated on the files tied to Jeffrey Epstein and believed there was a government cover-up protecting his accomplices. The report is based on text messages from February 15th and from sources who worked with the man, identified as a 21-year-old Austin Tucker Martin at a North Carolina golf course. TMZ also reported regularly expressed support for Trump. Obviously, by this point, he wasn't much of a MAGA fan anymore, considering he was prepared to attack the president's estate. Cool. I don't know if you read up, this is a text message from him on the Epstein files, but evil is real and unmistakable. The people, or the best people like you and I can do, is use what little influence we have. Tell other people about what you hear about the Epstein files and what the government is doing about it. Raise awareness. And if maybe a right-wing response would be to say, well, yeah, it's Democrats fanning the flames of the Epstein files. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't. Similar to how whenever we say Trump is a threat to democracy and they go, that's encouraging violence against them. And you go, no, why would I believe in the tenets of democracy? One of them being a peaceful expression of your political worldview. That's one of the beautiful aspects of it. Why would I be against someone who's damaging to those principles, and the way that I express being against them is violating those very principles I'm trying to protect? That doesn't make any sense. So yes, you can accurately describe Trump as being against our democracy or covering up the Epstein files while also being completely opposed to political violence. But remember, if you tracked the airtime on this topic over the last multiple years, it used to be a much more right-wing coded topic. Now, of course, once Trump started engaging in a cover-up, then some of the right-wingers stopped liking talking about it so much. But him being obsessed with Epstein doesn't inform this argument that it must have been some radical leftist. Doesn't mean radical leftists don't sometimes engage in violence, and that's completely wrong as well. But again, to point out the contradictions here, it's really sad to see, for example, if a trans shooter does a shooting, the MAGA media interpretation of it is that this is a byproduct of trans identity and culture, and that the discussion shouldn't just be about how horrendous that person was for doing that action, but it should be a discussion about trans people and what about that culture or that identity group makes this happen. Or if it's someone who actually does have more left-wing politics, it needs to be a discussion in their mind about what about left-wing ideology in general makes people do the violence. But then even in the cases they care the most about, which are instances where Trump's life is threatened, and two of those cases are people who came from a right-wing background and or weren't very political, but were young white men around a gun culture, around a pro-Trump family, they never want to talk about in that case, or in cases where it's targeted against Democrats, what about the broader pro-Trump culture would promote violence? There's never consistency on that. This is just, whenever it's Melissa Hortman, they just make conspiracy theories about how actually he wasn't pro-Trump. He was hired by Tim Walz, even though he said he was pro-Trump and had a history of it, and his list of people were Trump's enemies. You have to be consistent if you're going to try to do those broader conclusions responding to acts of violence. And as I was saying, in the Melissa Hortman example, you have them completely denying the facts of the political ideology, meaning definitely not wanting to extrapolate broader statements or conclusions about what pro-Trump culture or MAGA culture would do to promote violence. So that's kind of what was on my mind in analyzing some of the reactions. And I'll just show you this. I mean, it just came out, so it's kind of relevant. The Cato Institute, which is a libertarian right wing, so not MAGA right wing, but libertarian right wing, if I'm not mistaken, did yet another analysis of politically motivated killings. And once again, concludes the risk of being killed in a politically motivated attack in the U.S. is low, a Cato study shows. Excluding 9/11 and the Oklahoma City bombing, most deaths come from right-wing attackers, followed by Islamists, and then left-wing attackers. And you can see the Islamism is green, right-wing is red, left-wing is blue, and across decades, all the way up into the modern years, you have this same trend. And sometimes it shifts a little bit, but the right wing's more likely than left wing. So that doesn't at all take away from how horrifically tragic a left wing motivated murder would be. But if we're going to address this problem, analyze it, get to the bottom of what's causing isolated, deranged people to do terrible things based on political views, it has to start from a place of honesty. So in that vein, I want to remind you that I don't know for sure what this guy's motivation was. It might be kind of difficult. An investigation will play out. He's dead now, so it's kind of difficult, but an investigation can probably gather a lot of those facts. We have initial reports. Those could be wrong. That could be a coworker who got it wrong, or a text message that didn't properly represent the proper motivation. And so I'm just giving you the facts as of now, and they could change. And that's how these stories should be handled, as opposed to just, this is what I want it to be, and so I'm going to assume that it is, and then make a bunch of big and politically provocative points because of it.